On July 8, 2022, an event shocking the world took place in Japanese politics. Former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot and killed in Nara while giving a campaign speech for the Liberal Democratic Party candidate. His death directly affected the result of Japan's 26th House of Councillors elections on July 10th. The four-party coalition advocating for constitutional amendment, headed by the Liberal Democratic Party, won a total of 177 seats. Since then, the pro-amendment force has possessed more than two-thirds of the seats in both the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors of Japan. The condition was ripe for moving for a constitutional amendment in the parliament. The current constitution of Japan was formulated by the Japanese government under the leadership of the Allied General Command in Japan. It was published on November 3, 1946 and came into effect on May 3, 1947. It is called the Peace Constitution. Article 9 prohibits Japan from owning an army and forbids Japan for declaration of war. The conservative forces in Japan have vigorously promoted the process of constitutional amendments for many years, and the core appeal is to amend Article 9 of the Constitution. However, as per Article 96 of the Constitution, a constitutional amendment motion must be first approved by more than two-thirds of all members of both houses and then put to a referendum with more than half of the votes in favor before the constitutional amendments can be realized. The very fact that the Peace Constitution was issued under the auspices of the United States Occupation Authority provides a pretext for the Japanese conservative forces to set off multiple waves of constitutional amendment. In December 1954, Ichiro Hatoyama became the Prime Minister of Japan. He publicly declared that to correct the occupation policy, we should first amend the Constitution, especially the Article 9 of the Constitution. In 1955, under the mediation of Hatoyama, a Liberal Democratic Party took shape and directly wrote the constitutional amendment into its party platform. In February 1957, Kishi Nobusuke came to power. He launched the Defense Force Maintenance Plan, which greatly enhanced the military power. He sought to circumvent the Article 9 of the Constitution and set up a constitutional investigation meeting, looking for a crack for wedging the constitutional amendment in. Nakasune Yasuhiro, who became Prime Minister in November 1982, tried to make the Peace Constitution nominal by explaining and revising. And in 1987, it broke through the limit that the defense expenditure should not exceed 1% of the GNP. After the end of the Cold War, the Japanese conservative forces continued to invalidate the Peace Constitution through peripheral legislation, so as to achieve the goal of indirect constitutional amendment. On 1999, the Japanese Congress passed the Law on Peripheral Events. In 2001, the Law on Cooperation in United Nations Peacekeeping Activities Amendment and the Law on Special Anti-Terrorist Measures were enacted. Breakthroughs has been made in expanding the scope of overseas troops and relaxing the firearm protocols of self-defense forces. The goal of de facto constitutional amendments was basically achieved. In April 2001, Junichiro Koizumi became Prime Minister. He claimed that the current constitution prohibits the maintenance of military strength and the use of force, and that this abnormal situation must end. In June 2003, the Japanese Congress passed 3 bills regarding self-defense in a package, that is, the amendment to the Self-Defense Forces Act, the amendment to the Security Council Establishment Act, and the Act on Responding to Armed Attacks. This way, the peaceful constitution was further undermined. After this, Shinzo Abe, who has inherited his grandfather Kishi Nobusuke's political DNA and made constitutional amendment his lifelong political goal. By promulgating relevant bills and lifting the ban for collective self-defense, Abe abandoned the policy of defending defense exclusively that has been long held by the post-war Japan and provided a legal basis for foreign military operations. In 2015, the series of new security bills were forcibly passed in the Japanese parliament and put into practice in 2016. In addition, in order to achieve the goal of constitutional amendment as soon as possible, the Abe cabinet introduced the national voting law in 2007, which lowered the requirement for constitutional amendment. In May 2014, the Japanese parliament passed the amendment to the national voting law, which lowered the age limit for eligible voters for referendum down to 18-year-old, with the intention of expanding the support for constitutional amendment. On July 8, 2022, Abe, who had left the office, was assassinated on the street of Nara, which triggered voting enthusiasm among the constituents of the Conservative coalition and helped the pro-amendment forces to obtain more seats in the House of Councillors re-election. The current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida strives to increase military expenditure to 2% of GDP within 5 years. Not surprisingly, the Kishida cabinet will make full use of the hard-earned political advantages in the two houses of parliament to vigorously move for the constitutional amendment. Turning right is the general trend and distinctive feature of the post-war Japanese politics. Both the old and new conservative forces who advocated constitutional amendment aim to rebuild a so-called normal country, a trinity of economic, political, and military powers. Under the decades-long propaganda of Japanese conservative forces, the strength of Japan's domestic advocacy for constitutional amendment has been growing. The social atmosphere for revising the peaceful constitution has already been created. The indulgence of the United States also provided a relaxed international environment for the Japanese government to speed up the pace of constitutional amendment. As the power of the United States continued to wane, in order to maintain its hegemonic status, it seeks to untie Japan, arm Japan, and use its special geopolitical position in the Asia-Pacific region to contain the US' own enemies. In addition, the Russian-Ukrainian war also brought security anxiety to Japan and pushed the public opinion to tilt towards constitutional amendment. What is the profound background of Japan's constitutional amendment? What is the prospect? Should Japan's constitutional amendment be successful, what impact will it have on the global politics and economy? To this end, we interviewed several senior experts.
I was in Japan only once, in 1991, after the first Gulf War, when we organized international war crimes tribunals around the world in 19 different countries to charge the US imperialism with war crimes in its war on Iraq. And one of the sessions was held in Tokyo. But what everyone was debating in Tokyo at that time, everyone in the political movement was discussing, was Article 9, because that was when this reinterpretation of Article 9 was beginning. And how could Japan help the US in Iraq? This came up again in 2001, and in 2003, the next war on Iraq. Japan wanted to participate, and they couldn't get past the conditions of Article 9. So they instead gave money for the war. But I could see this, you could see this debate, it's not just a debate, it's a real political struggle. It's a real class struggle in Japan, really, to this day. It's called Article 9, but it's really a struggle of who will have the control, which direction will the country go.
If the constitutional amendment succeeds, what will happen to Japan?
The present constitution was inaugurated as a result of Japan's defeat in the war, and the Allied forces' occupation policy of democratization and denuclearization. The current constitution has so far restrained Japan's militarization and war involvement. However, the conclusion of the Peace and Society Law and the International Peace Support Law in 2015 meant the Constitution had essentially amended if the provisions of constitution get actually amended, Japanese society will enter the next stage. Japan travel making will accelerate.
The only thing that can slow down this doing away with Article 9 is massive people protest. For Prime Minister Kishida, he wants to do what those before him have done, and that is to further and further militarize Japanese society and further align it with US war plans. But the reinterpretation of Article 9 really has made Article 9 almost obsolete. It has again and again brought the military into a stronger role. And today, Japan will be the third largest military in the world, in terms of equipment. And the ruling party is now doubling the defense spending. The defense spending has been increasing for the past 10 years, every single year, and it is scheduled to double in the next 5 years. And it is not only an increase of equipment and personnel, but it is changing everything in Japan. And it is a military aggression. It is opposed by, I think, the majority of Japanese people who want a peaceful Japan. And this has been true. This struggle has been going on for 70 years now.
New constitution would eliminate Article 9 of the Japanese constitution, which would allow the Japanese government to increase its defense spending to 2% of GDP. It will strengthen military cooperation with the US, India, and Australia, and implement a policy of containment to China. In particular, it will strengthen the functions of self-defense forces based in Ryukyu Islands and promote the construction of US military bases in Japan to force a major change in the status quo of geopolitics in Asia-Pacific region. In the future, Japan's self-defense force will also be actively involved in international affairs by dispatching troops and providing weapons to conflicts and wars in which the United States is involved.
And this is a choice for Japan. Will they still keep that alliance with US imperialism? That means they destroy their trade with China. Do they join in the militarization and the crisis in Taiwan? That's their decision at this time. This is very difficult for Japan. It will have economic consequences. So it's a new period right now, and we need to relook everything that we've seen in the past. Japan is building a big military machine to act as a partner, as an ally with the US. That's not in the interests of the people of Japan, of the working people. And so today, to demand peace and neutrality and to stop this war machine is a very important demand.
What role did the United States place in it?
Why is US imperialism so interested in Japan remilitarizing and doing away with Article 9? Because this is not something that comes from Japan internally. This is being pushed hard by the US military, who wants allies, frontline partners in their aggression against China and also against Russia and against North Korea. And they want to use Japan's military capacity in a tight alliance with US imperialism. And they have a great deal of control and influence in this process. The same thing is happening in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe and in the surrounding of Russia today. There is a promoting of militarism and war by US imperialism. Well, of course, there are Japanese militarists that have always wanted to break away from the US occupation of Japan, yes, but Japan for 70 years, especially the right wing, has done the bidding and the demand of US imperialism. And the forces that have resisted this have been the workers' movement, the socialists, the communists in Japan, that from the very beginning opposed Japanese remilitarizing of society and defended Article 9. They called for Article 9 as a peace clause because they did not want the militarization of Japan.
What impact will it have on the surrounding geographical environment and the global politics in general?
In fact, Japan's government is preparing to conduct a second Battle of Okinawa in the Ryukyu Islands. This is an ethnically discriminatory policy of using Ryukyu as a battlefield and leaving the Japanese mainland unaffected by the war. Just as Operation Dumping Stone was used in Ryukyu Islands during the Pacific War, we believe that Ryukyu should become independent from Japan as soon as possible. Ryukyu was an independent country until 1879, and after the annexation of Ryukyu in the same year, Ryukyu was made a Japanese colony. US military bases are imposed on it, and now it's about to become a war zone again. Many Ryukyuans have expressed their opposition to construction of a self-defense forces base and the new US military base in Henoko by holding referendums, but the Japanese government is forcing them to do so. The only way to stop this is for the Ryukyu Islands to become independent. In response to the situation in the Taiwan Strait, the Japanese government has already built additional self-defense forces bases, radar bases, and missile bases in the Ryukyu Islands. After the constitution amendment, such militarization will further increase. If the Taiwan Strait is reunified in a non-peaceful manner, we believe that if the US military is deployed, it's highly likely that the self-defense force will be deployed along with it. Right-wing Japanese politicians consider Taiwan to be a lifeline of Japan's national defense and would strongly advocate the deployment of the self-defense force. Taiwan was the Japanese colony, and there are still moves to reassert control over it. They will try to take advantage of major developments in the Taiwan Strait situation.
There is a possibility that Japan will trigger conflict in East Asia. And if constitution is revised, the danger of becoming the cause will be even greater. Meanwhile, the declining birth rate and economic stagnation will lead to future Japanese society a further decline. I believe that the future of Japan will depend on how these two factors, the declining society and the danger of the society being localized, affect each other. In terms of national power, such as people and funds, Japan does not have power to wage war. However, there is a danger that Japan would recklessly move toward militarization. What should be done to prevent Japan from that? This is a difficult question. The surrounding country cannot change Japan. What the surrounding countries can do is make their own country economically and culturally more prosperous. The surrounding countries be prosperous and powerful will help keep Japan from becoming a troublemaker for the rest of the world. It may seem like a detour, but believe that the development of the surrounding countries and region and international exchange is important.
The experts' comments are thought-provoking. the current tendency of constitutional amendment in Japan has evidently releases a dangerous signal. For the stability of the Asia-Pacific region and the world peace, and for the harmony and common prosperity of civilizations, the international community should pay close attention to the constitutional amendments process in Japan.